Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from ScHoolboy Q called Blank Face LP. Ugh, man, ScHoolboy Q is a really frustrating artist for me. See, I covered him back in 2014 with Oxymoron, and while I found that album a slight step away from the genuinely excellent Habits and Contradictions, I still like ScHoolboy Q as an artist. On the tracks where his lyrics can feel a little stale or formulaic, he brings in a ton of personality to compensate, and when he wants to, he can definitely bring a smarter brand of writing to the material, with real subtext and insight. He definitely has a place in the top dog entertainment stable of MCs, a little bit more cutting than J-Rock's bruising style, and a little bit grittier than someone like Ab Soul or Kendrick Lamar. In other words, when we consider West Coast gangsta rap, he's probably one of the more accessible artists coming from TDE, and between his collaborations and charting singles, there's some real proof of that. My problem with ScHoolboy Q has always been consistency, balancing out mainstream appeal with stronger content, or production that doesn't drag back his impressive personality. He can get pretty raw, I want to see the production back him with that fire. And yet, in the lead up to this release, I hadn't exactly received a lot of requests to cover this album, at least not until recently, and I had no idea why. Granted, there hasn't been that huge single like Studio to push the album, and I've already mentioned that I wasn't really wild about his collaboration with Kanye West, that part that I talked about on Billboard Breakdown, but he's never had great luck with some of his singles anyways, and from all accounts, this album is going to be his longest and most elaborate to date, and his list of guest stars was pretty damn impressive. Forget Kanye West when you get Corrupt, Vince Staples, E40, Jadakiss, Anderson .Paak, Miguel, and even Kendrick Lamar contributing hooks. You've got a pretty impressive lineup of quality behind you, most of which deserve to be a lot more famous than they are, which would probably be one of the best ways to describe ScHoolboy Q, come to think of it. So I decided to dig into Blank Face LP. How'd it turn out? Well, I'm of a few minds when it comes to this album, and I think how many people will fall on it depends what they were expecting from ScHoolboy Q. If you're looking for some of his most lavish and eclectic production to date, with some solid guest performances all around that for the most part bangs pretty hard, you're gonna love this album. But if you're looking for ScHoolboy Q to evolve more as a rapper in terms of his content, or even match the levels of deeper introspection that he brought on Habits and Contradictions or even Oxymoron, well, I'm not quite sure he delivers that as well, at least not as consistently. So okay, before we get to that, let's start with ScHoolboy Q himself. And look, I've always liked this guy's flow and delivery. His rhymes might feel a little bit basic, but they're consistently well constructed with a solid alternating flows and delivered with real emotive presence, whether it be on the raw gangbanging tracks or the more quiet, contemplative moments, of which you could make the argument there's definitely a lot less of on this album. Much of this album is aiming to go louder and rougher, with the moments of introspection fewer and further between, and again, this is where expectations come to play. If you like the heavier gangbanging songs like the ultra-violent Ride Out with fellow Crip-affiliated rapper Vince Staples, or the braggadocious drug dealing of Dope Dealer with E40, a song I actually thought was pretty funny and I actually quite liked, or the more implied violence of Groovy Tony Eddie Kane, where Jadakiss brings an impressively intimidating verse and actually sounds distracting unlike ScHoolboy Q, you're gonna appreciate the hell out of this album. Hell, he can even hold up solo ventures like John Muir and Straight Ballin' that prove he's plenty capable of bringing his own raw intensity, to the point where the verses from TF and Traffic on the closer Tookie Knows 2, they almost feel kind of redundant in addition to being slightly less complex. ScHoolboy Q could have handled that song himself. But then again, when you put him opposite Kanye West on that part where Kanye further sabotages his marriage, or against the Dogg Pound on Big Body dropping into what you could argue is some pretty painfully dated and basic flows, and even ScHoolboy Q sounds less interested. And the most obvious example of that being on what even he described as a bootleg Studio with Overtime. I mean, sure, Miguel and especially Justine Skye put in some really good work on their verses in the hook, but beyond that, that song does not belong in this album. It was clearly here for the major label, especially right before Tookie Knows 2, and right after Anderson .Paak delivers a killer performance on the title track. He just runs away with it. It sounds fantastic. And that's part of the frustrating thing. As much as I like it when ScHoolboy Q drops some hard-edged gangster rap bangers, as there are very few who can sound as visceral as he does, he actually makes more lasting impact for me when he gets more serious and introspective, like on Lord Have Mercy, where even he is sick and tired of having to keep his guard up when he goes back to his home, and Swiss Beats actually sounds pretty good on the hook. Or on the first half of the very bluesy vocals on Know Ya Wrong, where his contempt for a leech against him is later expanded on Never Change, where it later expands to encompass the environment that would feed into such systemic rot inside people, and how people can't just get out of it. It goes even further still on Black Thoughts, where he speaks out against the Bloods and Crips to lay down their colors, and how there should just be more of a focus on just living and surviving, going past Last 25, subverting the All Lives Matter slogan into referring to both Bloods and Crips, broader themes that really carry over into the title track and really connect for me. And I'll say, right out of the gate, I really love the broad thematic idea behind this album. Not just the hardened, emotionless demeanor that comes with protecting one's emotions with a blank face, but also the possibility of being seen as faceless to the outside world as a black man, and especially to cops so prone to dismiss them all, even though he repeatedly says that he's out of that gangbanging world now. That dichotomy has always been at the root of his hip-hop persona, and man, I wish he went deeper into that. That's arguably my biggest issue with this album, how close it is to really tapping into some powerful commentary on that theme, but kind of missing the mark with some really kind of questionable lines, specifically when it gets political. For one, even though he probably made him money, it rings as kind of painfully shallow for him to say thank you Mr. Reagan on Groovy Tony Eddie Kane, especially considering what Ronald Reagan did with the drug war in the 80s, or to pair Malcolm X's famous phrase by any means with a hook driving the gangsta hustle on that song. And then there are points where lyrically I'm just left kind of exasperated, where ScHoolboy Q calls him the Pussy Rambo on Big Body, or when Luke Skywalker continues to not impress me on the second half of Know You're Wrong, where he calls the girl to jump into his bank account so he can deposit her. You know, treat her like currency, which I wouldn't exactly call romantic or workable with the rest of the song. But okay, while those are some significant gripes, does the music and production at least deliver? Well, for the most part, it really does, featuring some of ScHoolboy Q's most varied and weird production to date. The one thing you'll notice as early as Torch is that there's a lot more guitars and live bass lines, and while I feel the hook on that song can feel a little bit cluttered thanks to the heavier vocal overlays, a lot of other songs connect a lot stronger for me. The piano, waves of chimes, and horn touches from Terrace Martin on Know You're Wrong. Terrace Martin is really on fire on this album. That transition to a song that's almost close to what J-Rock had on 90059. Then you have the guitar solo that creeps through the back of the crushing bass and drill like snares on Ride Out, the funky guitar against the dustier groove on John Muir, and the richer elements coming through in the strings on the title track. And that's not counting more of the G-Funk elements that creep in through the thicker bass lines and synths, especially on tracks like Never Change with a really solid hook from SZA. And hell, there are songs like Lord Have Mercy that pull on a darker and yet more soulful foundation that really does come through well. But ScHoolboy Q also has a reputation for pulling for some more off-kilter melodies for his songs, and that can be kind of a mixed blessing. I mean, I like the atonal dank production on Dope Dealer courtesy of Metro Boomin, which ScHoolboy Q really handles well with a great flow, but as I've already said on Billboard Breakdown, with the exception of the much deeper final third with the echoing booms, I really did not like the melody on that part, and it gets even worse on Big Body. The production that Tyler the Creator gives ScHoolboy Q, with the beeping and tinkling sound effects against a very flat synth line, it just feels kind of chintzy and not bringing the same atmosphere the rest of the album. Of course, then you have the flip side where the bass is so thick and heavy that it swamps out the entire song. Like on the otherwise surprisingly agreeable Whatever You Want with the bouncy yet jagged synths. Sure, it's a pretty shallow song, but it's got some danceable presence to it. I actually quite like it. Or on the closer, Tookie Knows Too, that was grimy enough on its own without the huge bass. And then finally, a few hooks didn't quite connect with me. I've never been wild about what Kendrick Lamar calls his Lord of the Rings voice on Black Thoughts, or whatever the hell Lance Skywalker keeps doing, but a few of the hooks here felt a tad too broad to really fit in with the rest of the atmosphere, not quite meshing as well as they could. But look, to summarize, again, I'm kind of conflicted about this album, and I've got the frustrating feeling that is for as good as it is, it could have been one of the best of the year if it just pushed a little bit harder on the content. For as much as ScHoolboy Q can crank out bangers that I will inevitably enjoy, I have to wonder if they've got a bit of a shelf life, especially lyrically, in comparison with the more soulful or introspective cuts. Now, thankfully, ScHoolboy Q has so much personality and knack for descriptive language that it almost doesn't matter, the bangers are that good. But considering how long this album was, already some songs are starting to feel a little bit redundant for me, which didn't really happen with either of his last two albums. That said, he's got strong production and some great guest performances. For the most part, that can redeem a lot, so I'm gonna give this record a very strong 7 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation, but with a tighter focus, I'm convinced that ScHoolboy Q could actually make that killer record that could surpass Habits and Contradictions and really connect as a genuine classic. He's showing the potential here, now all he has to do is do it. And I'm looking forward to it when he does. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Got the poll up here, so if you guys all think this is one of the finest albums of the year, let me know. I'm actually curious to see where most people fall on it in comparison with other albums. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.